I've actually been involved in this for 50 years now, nearly. I mean, I first got involved in the mid-60s when it was, consciousness was just beginning to come into people's awareness. There was something in consciousness that's where we could change the world, was by changing consciousness. And back then in the 60s, well, obviously a lot of it was fueled by psychedelics, that sort of thing. That was the initial opening, and then we started trekking off to India and following Eastern gurus, because that's where we saw the wisdom lay. But back in those days, I know we all saw it as a very complex thing. If you did all these incredible meditation practices and really tried hard, you might, 20, 30, 40 years have an awakening, and if not, maybe the next life or something. It was seen as a long, arduous journey. And I think what's happened over the years, we've just peeled away a lot of the trappings of the different cultures and getting closer and closer and closer to that essential message of all the spiritual teachings. And as we've done so, it's got simpler and simpler and easier. And that's why I'm fascinated by the whole rise of non-duality, really, over the last 10 years. I mean, it's always been there. And I was reading non-duality stuff back then, but I didn't understand it. I was thinking, the pure self is something I'm going to discover. And when I discover the pure self, it's going to be, I was reading all these texts, it's going to be this amazing thing. And now just realizing, as so many teachers are pointing out, the pure self is just what I already know. It's just that pure sense of I-ness, which is always present. And we don't have to spend decades of meditation to get there. We can touch into that at any moment. And the work, if there's any work, is actually the practice of knowing how to return to that day after day after day, or moment after moment. So I think, yes, things have just got simpler and easier, and that's what's so fascinating. I think what the whole non-dual movement, or the emphasis on non-duality, has brought is just this realization that consciousness is not something we're trying to find, it's not some other object, some phenomenon in the universe, that consciousness is, and that is all we know, is what arises in our experience. I think that's part of the emphasis in non-duality. And so it's really brought us back to ourselves rather than seeking out there for something. And I think that's the most significant thing it's done. It's just like bringing us right back to us here, now, and our own present experience in the moment. Yeah, I think there really can be a bridge between science and consciousness these days. I think in the past, science was saying, here's what we've discovered about the world, and it's in conflict with what mystical traditions have discovered, apparently in conflict. But I think that's because they think the mystical traditions are describing the material world out there, the world that science has discovered. But I see the mystical traditions are describing the experience of the world inside us, how our experience manifests, how we can step beyond experience and discover the source of all our experience. And so when the mystics talk about the universal source, they're talking about something inner. When scientists are talking about the universal source, the universal field, the unified field, they're talking about something external. And so they think there's a conflict, but that conflict doesn't really exist. And I think when we realize that the two are complementary, science is describing the external world and the mystics are describing the internal world, and ultimately they're part of the same world, they're part of reality. Our consciousness is part of the greater reality. And when we see that, it's like realizing we're discovering two sides of the same coin. There's the scientific side and there's the mystic side. And realizing they're two sides of the same coin, what is then fascinating is to realize that some of the deep principles are very, very similar. And that's why I think there's a lot of people fascinated by how some of the ideas in quantum physics, for example, or modern science, reflect the ideas of the mystics. And I see that's because we're approaching the same underlying reality from two different perspectives, from the external and the internal.